Hey everyone, how's it going? Jawad here as always with Hit the Apex podcast. Hope everyone is well wherever you are in the world. Hope you enjoyed your weekend and the week so far. Of course you would have enjoyed it. It was the Austrian Grand Prix. Always an exciting race. Unfortunately, not so exciting in terms of behaviour trackside, which I will talk about and address a bit later on. Absolutely appalled by what came out from the weekend, unfortunately, and it's really sad to hear those stories. But let's talk about the race itself, the race weekend. It was a sprint weekend too. That totally escaped me last week when we were talking about it. Me and George talking about the weekend ahead. I was like, "Oh, is this the first sprint weekend we've had in 2022?" And I was corrected that no, we had one in Imola, which felt like a long time ago. But overall, it was a day of pleasure and pain for Ferrari. We saw Charles Leclerc winning the race, his first win since the Australian Grand Prix, which again feels like a infinite amount of time ago, while his teammate Carlos Sainz, the British Grand Prix winner, had an epic engine blowout. What seemed like a certain Ferrari 1-2 finish exploded like the PU in the back of that Sainz Ferrari on lap 57. And not only that, Leclerc had his own issues as well with the throttle pedal. Did they get a piece of mozzarella cheese stuck under there? Pineapple from a pizza. We've speculated all week what it could have been, and quite funny responses. Anyway, I love having a bit of a giggle about Ferrari and their tactics, so it wouldn't be surprising if that something like that happened. But yeah, he had some throttle issues at the end of the race. There was something stuck under there that prevented him from lifting off. So when he was downshifting, there was some kind of throttle pressure which damages the engine if you've ever tried downshifting on with a certain amount of revs. You guys understand driving cars and all that sort of thing. But he cruised to a win, his third win of the season, and a win that didn't come from pole position as well. So congratulations to Leclerc for that. Early part of the weekend, Max Verstappen, he was dominant. He was dominant on Friday. He was fastest in qualifying to get the pole, and then won the sprint as well on Saturday while the Ferrari squabbled. And then come Sunday, we had cooler conditions on race day, and that saw Ferrari suddenly have the pace. They had better race pace than the Red Bull. They seemed to be kinder on the tyres, particularly on the hard tyre, which the Red Bull was not a fan of. We saw Max leading the race until lap 12, where Leclerc got past at turn 4, and it's been an age since we've seen Leclerc make a good overtake as well on his title rival Verstappen, if you want to still call them title rivals in this instance. But yeah, Red Bull just having an off day, which you don't see very often in terms of car performance. They've been very strong this year with their car. It's only with reliability that they've had problems, and if you're Sergio Perez in this race, you have a George Russell problem with them coming together on the first lap at turn 4. And I don't know what it is. It's always a Red Bull car versus a Mercedes car at turn 4, or a Red Bull car versus anyone at turn 4, because we saw a couple of years ago Alex Albon cost him a potential race win coming together with Hamilton at turn 4, which was Hamilton's fault. Then last year, Perez and Lando Norris coming together there, and Lando was hit with a penalty. In this instance, it was Russell who was being a bit ambitious and put Perez in the gravel with quite a bit of damage too, which took Perez out of the race, and he was hit with that same 5-second penalty as well. So, respect to the adjudicators in that instance for staying consistent with what they gave Lando last year, although I think the Lando Norris penalty was still a bit too harsh, if you ask me. We're always going to argue and debate about this sort of thing, and actually later on I will be bringing up the matter of stewarding and whatnot, the FIA, what's going on with them at the moment, because there seems to be quite a bit of chatter and talk going on, and a lot of discontent coming out of the drivers in regards to the FIA and the way that they're stewarding at the moment. So Perez out of the race, Russell hit with a 5-second penalty. George thought it was a bit too harsh. I mean, come on, mate. You still came back and finished fourth in the race, which was a good result. You finished where you started. Yeah, you could arguably say it cost him a podium, but it's still a good result considering you had a 5-second penalty in that, and you've got a much quicker car than the rest of the drivers behind you. So that was that. We saw early pit stops triggered, and with Verstappen coming in on lap 14. I thought coming into the race it should be a no-brainer one-stop race. But unfortunately, a lot of these drivers did do two-stoppers. Considering the conditions were not as harsh and as hot as we've seen in the past there at Austria, where the tyres really get eaten. And given that Pirelli bring their softest compounds as well to this circuit, Ferrari, for example, they proved that a one-stop race would have been possible, but they did do two stops just to kind of preserve their lead. They had the opportunity to, given circumstances as well, and then eventually a third stop came due to that virtual safety car that Sainz triggered, so Verstappen and Leclerc doing a third stop to go back onto the medium tyres. But yeah, Ferrari, before, when both cars were still in the race, 12 laps later were in after Verstappen to pit for the hard tyres in the first stint. So they really had the balance, they really had, the performance on the tyres that they started the race on, and something that you don't really hear often said this season about, Ferrari and their tyre life and car performance relative to the Red Bull. So that was good for them. They maximised that rare advantage that they had on Red Bull in this instance. As I said, we saw them come in and take a second stop to protect the lead, so to mirror what Red Bull was doing as well. They had the time in hand, of course, and the performance over Verstappen to be able to do so. And then, of course, when the virtual safety car came out for the Sainz DNF, both Verstappen and Leclerc were able to pit, though it was Max who maximised that stop for the medium tyre and was able to get the fastest lap as well. An extra point considering he finished in second, but overall came out quite strongly after the weekend because of the points that he would have got in the sprint race as well, the 8 points that he would have collected there. So when you look at the championship, it was no big loss. It was no big loss for him in terms of what Leclerc was able to gain. And yeah, Leclerc has gotten back up into second in the standings ahead of Perez, but still sits 38 points adrift. And 38 points is still more than a race win. Speaking in my Will Buxton voice, I don't mean to sound so silly, but it's still quite a bit to go, and who knows, in the next couple of races, we've got 2 more races left before the mid-season break, France coming up and then Hungary as well, but they're both circuits that Verstappen does well at, Red Bull have done well at in the past, so you would have to rely on some kind of car failure for the Red Bull, which Max has been quite blessed in recent times with reliability and everything. It's been all on Ferrari side, the reliability issues that they've had, and then again on Sainz's side of the garage, it's a bit of a blow for them. Are they worried about what is going to happen to Leclerc? I mean, given what happened in Canada as well, they took a penalty and then, still having issues. It's still a very hard one to pick at this stage, but I'd still want to be in the Red Bull camp, and, I'd still want to be Verstappen as well in this instance because they do have that advantage. Behind those two, Hamilton finishing third for the third time in 3 races. I was going to say in third races, that doesn't make any sense. But he did quite well considering the difficulty that they had coming into the weekend. They had a hard qualifying on Friday. Both Mercedes cars actually crashing. And how often do you see Lewis Hamilton making a qualifying or practice crash? It's not very frequent that happens, and he was very apologetic about it and having to give his engineers and mechanics extra work to do ahead of the sprint race, but qualified 8th, or as in finished the sprint race 8th and started the Grand Prix itself down there, worked his way up. It was quite a competitive midfield, I've got to say too, quite entertaining, the battles we saw, but we knew that the Mercedes pace was a lot better than that of, say, Alpine and Haas. But the fact that we saw Mick Schumacher and Hamilton fighting in the sprint race quite vigorously was pretty entertaining, but in the end, you knew that the Mercedes was going to get the job done and up into third. So solid third place for Hamilton. Again, you gotta have a little giggle, given all the struggles and insert quotation marks or inverted commas or whatever you want to say about Mercedes and how far ahead of the midfield they are. In terms of they've doubled the points that the rival or closest rival behind them in terms of McLaren and Alpine, who are tied on points now after this one. They're more than double the points ahead, so it's not like they're under threat. If anything, it was being talked about in the last month that perhaps Mercedes will threaten Ferrari to finish second in the Constructors, and who would have thought that at the start of the year in testing when everyone was riding off Mercedes. So they're looking good and they're improving every race. Russell finishing fourth, what else do you say apart from job well done? No point whinging about the penalty because, definitely when you look at the incident, it was he was being a bit too ambitious trying to go down the inside of that corner. And turn 4 has been a bit of a hot spot over the years, as we've seen, except for on this instance when Leclerc was able to get a clean move down. It's almost like Verstappen just left the door open and said, I give up. I don't have the race pace here to be able to fight you, so you go on by. But unfortunate for Perez to not be able to come out of that to continue on in the race. But another top 5 or top 4 finish, you've got to say, for Russell after the DNF that he had in Silverstone. Behind them, as I said, Alpine, strong race pace. They headed up what was a very competitive midfield as well. And great to see them getting the results. I know it's at the detriment of McLaren, who, we all want to, or I certainly want to be finishing ahead in this instance, but they're really capitalising on the pace that they've got. Ocon doing a good job leading. And when I say that it was an entertaining battle in the midfield, I mean, at one point you had 3 cars heading into turn 1, 3 abreast into turn 1. Then you got Lando Norris behind them, who rounds them all up. You had, I think, Ocon, you had both Haas cars maybe, Magnussen and Schumacher. Can't remember exactly, but Magnussen was in there too. Could have been Alonso even, but you had Lando come in and round them all up. So great job by them. Haas in the points, both cars, first time in I don't know how long, I think 2018 maybe, and Austria is generally a circuit which is really good for Haas and sometimes not really good for Haas, but double points finished, a career best of 6th for Schumacher as well, with Kevin in 8th. And what do you say, all the criticism and doubts about Schumacher's form, and now he's finally performing. So it's good on him for that. It's not like we doubted he was, capable. It's just, come on, mate, step it up. You need to start performing, or the pressure's going to come on you, regardless of, your surname and your heritage and all that sort of thing. So he is really improving. Maybe this is the start of his, rise. Who knows? I mean, it was good to see him holding his own when it came to fighting against Hamilton in the sprint. Sure, there was people getting a bit emotional and nostalgic because of Schumacher was fighting Hamilton wheel to wheel. Last time we saw that obviously was the great Michael Schumacher when he was driving the Mercedes that Lewis Hamilton's in now, fighting with Hamilton in the McLaren back in 2012. So, a few people getting nostalgic about that one. But it was great to see him holding his own in a Haas against the Mercedes. And he was quite angry too, you got to say, because he was a lot quicker. He certainly felt he was a lot quicker over the weekend, but Haas not reversing the positions in the sprint race, so Mick sadly finishing outside of the top 8, which would have gotten him some extra points as a result. But, to come back and finish 6th in the actual Grand Prix, is more rewarding than finishing 8th in the sprint, for example. So good job for them. Arguably their best race of this, not arguably, there's no argument, but it is their best race of the season, and having both cars in the points too. So not much more to say about them. You had Lando splitting both the Haas cars in 7th. And unfortunately, a better result was a better result was taken away by a 5-second time penalty for abusing track limits. So now this was one of the talking points, which I'll get to a bit later over the weekend. But track limits is always a dicey affair in Austria, the Red Bull Ring especially. And over the years, it's just been such a nightmare to police. This year, the FIA, the stewards, race director, they're all like, well, the whole season, let's say, their mantra or their directive has been, if you have all 4 wheels over the white line, that's, abusing track limits, you're done. You get 3 warnings, black and white flag, and then you get a 5-second penalty. That's been the rule all season. So we saw several drivers cop the 5-second penalty. There was Sebastian Vettel, Pierre Gasly, Guan Yu Zhou as well as Lando. So he potentially lost, a better position because of that. We had Daniel Ricciardo in the points for the first time since the Australian Grand Prix as well. So that was worth celebrating in itself, even though it was a 9th place finish. And a bit about Dan, actually, as well. As much as, I can go on about how their qualifying pace is still pretty bad, or Ricciardo in qualifying is still not as just not showing the goods. But we had Ricciardo himself come out on Instagram and post the message of his commitment to McLaren for 2023, saying, "I'm committed to McLaren until the end of the next year, and I'm not walking away from the sport. Appreciate it hasn't always been easy, but who wants easy? I'm working my backside off with the team to make improvements and get the car right back to the front where it belongs." So this obviously comes in response to what the media has been saying about, potential replacements. And when you look at McLaren globally, or what's going on, across the Atlantic over in IndyCar as well, bit of controversy coming out with McLaren announcing that they've got the reigning IndyCar champion Alex Palou signed for next year at Arrow McLaren SP. Hours after Chip Ganassi Racing, the team he races for, say that they've taken up an option on his contract for next year. So, 2 teams suddenly have the signature of Palou for 2023 in IndyCar. But, the thing, regardless of the thing with Ganassi and what that's going to cause in terms of fallout, is the fact that McLaren have gone on a spree of signing drivers. Not only have they kept Pato O'Ward, who was arguably like the leader of the IndyCar team, but also the one who potentially would have made the leap across to F1 if the timing was right and everything. But they've added Colton Herta, who's racing for Andretti in IndyCar, to the testing program and have given him the young driver test, and he did a test in Portimao this week with the 2021 McLaren. They've signed Alexander Rossi to the IndyCar team for next year. I don't think Rossi will be coming back across to F1 anytime soon. They've kept Felix Rosenqvist as well. So they've got 3 cars next year for IndyCar. Rosenqvist likely could go to the Formula E team, as has been talked about, but then bringing in Palou is an interesting one, because if you were Pato O'Ward, who at the start of this year there was supposedly a bit of friction between him and McLaren and Zach Brown before he decided to re-sign for the team. He was obviously a bit peeved at the fact that Colton Herta was given testing privileges with the Formula One team, and he thought that was going to be his role. bringing in someone like Palou, who is obviously, he's the reigning IndyCar champion. You want to be the number one, being O'Ward, he wants to be the number one at McLaren. And then now Palou with designs on going into F1 as well. Like, there's too many names suddenly. So, if you were O'Ward, you would be like, hang on, I thought that was for me, So it's not like McLaren have any shortage of candidates lining up to get into that seat if Ricciardo was to leave. And I still feel, as much as I want to see Ricciardo see out his 3-year deal and actually come good, get some results and, rediscover his mojo and everything. It's just, there's plenty of other candidates that I would want to put in the car instead of one of the IndyCar drivers. I mean, this week we've had names like Sebastian Vettel thrown around. Alex Albon as well has been an interesting one. Like, as much as I love Albon, I would rather Vettel in this instance. Who would have thought I'd say that all these years later? I want to see Sebastian Vettel come into McLaren. But I think, given the struggles that he's had at Aston Martin and, I don't see Aston improving anytime soon. I mean, I hope McLaren improve next year, but learning off, what went wrong this year and everything. But I feel like, he and Lando would be a good fit for each other. So, I'd almost prefer Vettel getting in the car. But I've said all along, I don't think Herta, for example, is going to be an improvement on Ricciardo in the car. He's still very much, a raw talent that needs to be tamed and everything. And the problem for McLaren is that we don't have both cars scoring points or, performing consistently together. Lando is out there doing the job all on his own. So we need someone who can be reliable and be able to do the job at scoring points for the team week in, week out. And I definitely think Vettel would be the kind of driver who would do that. I hope certainly that, if the team turn around their form, which I'm sure they can for next year, that if someone like a Vettel were to come in next year, for example, that's saying that Ricciardo would leave, that it would re-energize Vettel's career as well, which, he thought he was doing by going to Aston Martin, which unfortunately has not happened. Anyway, so back to Ricciardo. Yeah, it's great he scored points this weekend in Austria. Can we get more points? Hopefully that's the case and we get to see him see out a third year of his contract. But the announcement and everything, comes at an interesting time, given all the little fish swimming around McLaren at the moment. They've got no shortage of candidates that could replace him. Whether they would be the right fit as well in terms of, is it going to be a improvement on what they've got already remains to be seen, but it's difficult. It is quite difficult. So in an ideal world, you would like to see Ricciardo see it out and hopefully improve, and then we'll see what happens at the end of next year and what direction both team and driver want to take in that instance. So we'll leave it at that. Good in them to get double points as well, but again, the 5th for Alpine, and then of course Alonso coming in 10th, meant that they scored the more points and now are level with McLaren in the Constructors' Championship. So I think immediately that's going to be their concern, is the fact that, they've been 4th quickest team for the last couple of years. They've, been quite solid in the fact that they've not really had any threat from behind from the likes of Alpine or Haas or AlphaTauri. But, now they've got Alpine pretty much there, ready to pounce on that, so they wouldn't want to lose that position to them. So it's quite crucial for them to hang on in that instance, and Ricciardo will definitely be a pivotal part of that for the back end of the season. Alonso, good job for him. Started on the last row of the grid with a power unit change. He kind of lucked in strategy wise because he started on the hard tyre, went quite late into the race. Almost thought he might do an Alex Albon from Australia, but unfortunately, or fortunately for him, he got a virtual safety car that came out for Sainz, switched to the medium tyre, and then was able to hang on and come back up into 10th. And sadly, the same was not. It was not the same for Valtteri Bottas, who ended up starting from the pit lane, because not only did he have a power unit change outside of his allocation, he had a rear wing change as well just before the race. So, of course, a pit lane start was necessary, and he just missed out on the top 10 in that instance. Dismal race for AlphaTauri. I mean, what do you say? Like, we were talking about AlphaTauri last week, and, Gasly stuck there for another season. And stuck is probably the apt word to use in this instance, because, they really don't look like they're doing well at the moment. So for Gasly especially, he had such a messy race. He ended with 2 5-second time penalties, one, of course, for the track limits violations, and then another for a hit on Sebastian Vettel. Yuki Tsunoda struggled throughout the whole race. He finished, he was kind of last. When you see that Sebastian Vettel was last of the classified runners, he didn't finish the race as such. But Tsunoda 16th. He actually got into trouble from Fernando Alonso for his racing etiquette as well at one point. Alonso coming off the grass down the straight and wagging the finger at him. He wasn't too happy with the way that the Japanese driver was racing. So pretty miserable race for AlphaTauri. And when you look at the Constructors' Championship, they're third last at the moment. They're in 8th, and not where you would want them to be. And only 9 points ahead of Aston Martin. So imagine if Aston Martin go on a run, they could relegate AlphaTauri further. So not good for them. But they're quite close to Haas ahead, and Alfa Romeo as well. So you could see the tides turning, but it is kind of a tight battle for 6th in the Constructors, so they could still yet come back. But don't know what's gone wrong for them this year. You would have thought that with a regulation change this big, and given how well Red Bull are doing at the front, and how much they share between the two parties, that AlphaTauri would be up there, but they're not. So it's quite puzzling to see them where they are at the moment. So that pretty much covers the race itself, the race weekend, what happened on track. So the talking points, as I was saying earlier, the track limits situation. I mean, one thing I will give the FIA is the fact that, they made it black and white as far as how their approach to track limits this year. It's, if you go all 4 wheels off the track, that's it, you get a penalty kind of thing. They don't have that grey area like there was, for quite a few years now, that everyone was blowing up over. And, last year in particular, where it was like after every session, track limits rules would change. You can't. So in practice, you're allowed to go. Go off at this track and not lose your lap time yet. In qualifying, you're not. And then in the race, you are kind of, it made no sense. It was very confusing. In total, there was 43 reported violations during the race. And as I said, there was 4 drivers who took the 5-second time penalty. Drivers complained that with the fairings on the front wheels as well, it was hard to see the white lines. What do? Do you not drive on the limit? Don't push it to the limit in this instance. But tell drivers not to push it to the limit. They're always going to push it to the limit. They wouldn't be Formula 1 drivers if they didn't. So who's got to learn in this instance? I mean, sure, they've got to come to a compromise. They've got to come find a better solution for this. But it seems to be another small issue in a wider issue with the FIA and, the race direction and stewarding this season, which, again, after the events of last year, it's hard not to refer back to, the end of the season last year, because that was supposed to be the catalyst for, the FIA making the changes that they have and making the changes for better, which, when you look at it, when you've got drivers that, loggerheads with the race director, you have Vettel, for example, walking out of a driver's briefing or whatever and facing, or he copped a pretty hefty fine, which has been suspended till the end of the year. it certainly feels like nothing has changed, or nothing has changed for the better. It's actually getting worse, and then all the other little issues that they've had through the year as well. So, what is it? Why is the FIA so disconnected from Formula One? And this whole thing of micromanagement by the new FIA president. It's just, it's so confusing. It's very concerning, watching it unfold and everything. So, yeah, it's one of those stories this year that I hope doesn't, define the season. And yeah, while kicking out the previous race director, Michael Massey, was supposed to usher in change and solve all the solutions, it really hasn't, and that's what makes me feel for Massey even more, is that the wider problem that was kind of behind everything that happened, the poor calls and, just the way that the rules are structured and everything, has still not changed for this year. And, we heard in the FIA statement this week, after it was announced that Massey would be leaving the FIA, Massey say something for the first time since December last year. So, first words we've had, and it was all class. It was all very, everything that I come to think of Massey. A lot of people are going to still hate him and, just can't think of anything good to say about him. But he ultimately, did his job as best he could. He made a mistake. People were not going to get over it. But at the end of the day, it's the system that's flawed. And, you're going to just keep crucifying the person for it. Go for it. Just do it. Whatever makes you happy, do it. But at the end of the day, the system is still flawed. And that's the thing that is concerning me now. And yeah, I'm kind of happy, because I feel for Massey's mental health, whatever he's been through this, past 6 months, or it's been longer than 6 months, 8 months now since the finale. So I'm really happy that he gets to come home to Australia. I'm sure he'll take up some senior role at Motorsport Australia as well. Maybe we'll see him back in Supercars or something. But yeah, he doesn't need that negativity. And as far as the FIA are concerned, going to sit here and watch what happens. But I really feel a lot of concern, because I don't think things are going in the right direction at the moment. As for the foul behaviour over the weekend as well, coming out from the crowd, sexual harassment sexual harassment of spectators and whatnot as well. I mean, this is unacceptable. And the fact that, when you look at what happens here in footy games and whatnot, there's phone numbers scattered across the, what am I calling it? Stadiums and grounds to phone in antisocial behaviour and that sort of stuff. And, whenever something like that happens, there's instant bans. You harass or you abuse players on the grounds and whatnot, or you get involved in altercations with fellow patrons and stuff like that, you get a ban. And I agree with Sebastian Vettel when he says, they should get a lifetime ban for this sort of behaviour. It's absolutely disgusting. No one should have to go, you pay your hard-earned money to go to an event. And, Formula One is not cheap at the moment, of course, because of its popularity. So people who go to have a good time, to be able to enjoy the race weekend, just enjoy the atmosphere, don't want to go and made to feel so little and, to feel abused and to just feel the way that they did. I feel really angry thinking about that. So, those sort of fans who, or I shouldn't even be calling them fans, but those sort of people who turn up and want to cause trouble or just want to act lewd and vulgar, you just have no place being in public. If you want to do that, stick to your own home, okay, and stick to yourself, because you don't deserve to inflict that upon other people, other people trying to do the right thing. And I'm not naming, there's no point naming fan bases or this, they support this driver or they support that driver. It's completely irrelevant that. So, yeah, it's just frustrating to think about, unfortunately. So I'm glad, though, that, Formula One and specific teams as well did what they could to reach out to the fans who were affected by this behaviour and were victim to all this. We saw some really nice images of, I think it was Aston Martin, maybe, or McLaren, who invited a couple of these fans into their hospitality, and, Sebastian Vettel posing for photos with them as well. So, it's nice to see that they care about this. But, the people who were the instigators in this instance, the offenders, they need to be rubbed out. They need to be clamped down upon so that this behavior is discouraged from the future. So, yeah. After all the rants about, inclusivity and whatnot over the past few weeks, I feel like, this is another thing that's just tarnishing the image for some people, but I hope it's not the case. We just need to rub this out as soon as possible so that it doesn't become a issue at another venue. Just had to clear the nose a little bit. Apologies, I do sound a bit nasally today, a bit blocked up with the old hay fever and congestion, so trying my best to get through it. It makes it a bit harder to talk as long as I do for these podcasts, but we'll move it on to Supercars because we had the Townsville 500 on over the weekend. Here are my talking points. Great weekend of racing, though. I was particularly happy to see a return of long distance racing because I really have missed, those longer distance races that I got so accustomed to before the pandemic hit and everything. Obviously, because of, restrictions on personnel in the pit lane and, social distancing rules and all that, and even financial reasons, they had to ditch the previous super sprint format, which was two 200 kilometer races for the weekend. You would have your, pit stops for fuel and whatnot. But they ditched it in favour of, 3 shorter sprint races, which would have a 1 tyre stop, and that was it. And the shorter races, which were 45 minutes to an hour in length, would appeal more to casual fans with shorter attention spans and whatnot. So while that has been exciting, and I do like that format at some events, I would like to see, longer races at more events too. So the fact that we're now sort of heading back to normality and whatnot, we have a full calendar this year for Supercars. We're not having any of these double header nonsense at 4 consecutive races at SMP with the same format, which just, except for one, they did do a long distance format there for one of those 4 events last year. But, even there, they could have mixed it up a little bit just to keep it a bit entertaining and different and whatnot. So during the week, I actually whipped up a kind of draft dream calendar for Supercars, how I would like to see it, because 2020 originally the calendar was supposed to have the 200 kilometer races, that sort of super sprint format before it all went pear-shaped with the pandemic. So whilst I like that, I also like the 3-race format. So in my calendar, which has 15 events for the season, I made it a mix. So you'd have your 3-race super sprints, but then you would also have an event or two with the 200 kilometer racing as well, which is my version of a long distance event. Because I like chewing on the fat of strategy. That's been something that I've been saying all week. I came up with that for my Talking Points article. But, who doesn't? Like a proper hardcore motorsport fan loves being able to do some calculations and figure out strategy and whatnot. It does keep it mixed, and I think that's what I really enjoyed about this weekend, is that we saw differing strategies. Even though it didn't really benefit Tim Slade and David Reynolds, for example, in that first race, starting on the off super soft tyre. They were leading early because everyone else is on the hard tyre, and then the offset there was quite visible. They didn't really get any good results as a result of it, but they definitely mixed it up and gave everyone else something to think about. So quickly, let's go over this draft calendar that I came up with. 15 events, of course, kind of keeping it. If I wanted to go full-on dream calendar, I'd just say, yeah, we'll do this race here, this race there, that's it, let's go to Spa. Not going to happen. In keeping with kind of the route that they go in terms of the season, starting off, we have like an epic street race or whatever. Then in the middle of the season, that's where they do the trip to the north, where with what's going on at the moment, they go up to Darwin, Townsville and whatnot. And then, of course, I'm bringing back the Enduro Cup because I love the Enduro Cup, and why more people don't like the Enduro Cup, I don't understand. I love endurance racing, that's why people love WEC, they love GT racing, anything by SRO, co-drivers, pit stops. It's great. So starting off, Newcastle has meant to be the season opener for a couple of years now, but of course, pandemic kind of laid waste to that. So I look forward to that coming back next year. And they have the 2x250k format across the weekend. Melbourne 400 stays the same with the 4 sprint races. Tassie next up, they can have the 3 super sprint races for the weekend. Perth night format as it is, keep it. Winton is kind of the one where I was like, do we do like the old style super sprint format with the 200k races, or do the new one? And I was like, I'll go with the new one for now, because it is quite interesting how people choose their tyres for the weekend and use their tyres across the weekend. Darwin Triple Crown, another one I was like, it'd be nice to go back to the old Triple Crown format where you'd have to, win the shootout, win the race, or win both races or whatever to be Triple Crown rather than just be the round winner. But that doesn't change anyway where it is on the calendar. Townsville, same format. Then I've got Ipswich, bring back Queensland Raceway. Like, it was a toss-up between that and Phillip Island. But Phillip Island, if Sandown drops off, I'd put Phillip Island down as my Phillip Island 500 pre-Bathurst Enduro. Go over to the Bend. Now, the Bend is where I do like a longer distance race. I don't like the short distance races there. I think, a circuit like the Bend does lend itself to, pit stops and longer distance racing a lot better. Could even have that as the pre-Bathurst Enduro, because it was meant to be a couple of years ago anyway. Then before the Enduro Cup, Sydney, do the night race there in August. Good time for it there, as it will be, or as it should have been this year anyway. Then September, your endurance season begins. Sandown 500, retro round, bring it on. October Bathurst, as it is, and then a couple of weeks later, the Gold Coast 600 to round it out. Go over to New Zealand to Pukekohe for the Auckland Super Sprint and do the short distance races there, because it always lends itself to that. And then finish your season off at the end of November, start of December with the Adelaide 500. So there's my 15 race dream calendar, which, is pretty doable in my eyes. But, there's always reasons why they can't do that. And I'm sure they'll probably say, it doesn't work and whatnot. So, yeah. Anyway, let's talk about the racing itself over the weekend. So, Shane van Gisbergen did sweep the 500. So, first race there on Saturday, he overhauled Will Davison, who did get the better start and led the early part of the race. Van Gisbergen opted to take on more fuel in his first pit stop and was able to, did drop behind quite a lot of people, but then came back as the race progressed. As I said, there was a super soft tyre offset for Slade and David Reynolds at the start of the race. They were able to lead, but then because they went onto the hard tyres for their last stint, they quickly fell away because everyone else was on the super soft tyre. So that's what I mean. These different strategies do make it quite interesting, because you don't know how the field is going to shake out. It's not as simple as, okay, so he pits there and then he's going to come out here and, that's going to be the order. You kind of left scratching your head until the final stops and see how the order shapes out. Gizzy pits with 25 laps to go and has a 17-second deficit to Davison, who's in the lead, was able to come back and take the win off him. That way, Cam Waters sealing the podium ahead of Andre Heimgartner, so great pace from the Brad Jones racing team. But unfortunately, the Tickford Mustang just that quicker in the final stint to take the podium off him, but still a good race result for Heimgartner and whatnot. And Cam Waters was able to get the pole in the top 10 shootout for race 20 as well, but was only able to get it on the podium again in third, as it was a battle between Van Gisbergen and Anton De Pasquale. And the controversial final lap clash between those two. So we saw Anton coming back at Van Gisbergen at the end of the race. He had the pace in this occasion, and then had the opportunity to make a lunge at the final corner, though it kind of went pear-shaped and De Pasquale tagged Van Gisbergen. The Red Bull spun, and Anton, in his goodwill, tried to redress coming up to the finish line. He slowed right down, only for cheeky Shane, to just park up behind the Shell V-Power Mustang, because he's like, yeah, rather than, just take the position back like this, I'm going to humiliate you, make you cross the line first, cop a 5-second penalty or whatever, and then I'm going to win the race. So that was kind of a bit cheeky from Shane, I think, but at the same time, it's just like, this is how, much better I am than you this season, how much better I am compared to the rest of the competition this season. This is how I'm going to embarrass you and humiliate you. So a bit sad in that instance, but he did have the last lap. He got the 300 points as well, got to extend his lead in the championship after Darwin, where they did kind of take a little bit out of his lead, but yeah, it's still 274 points, which is quite a lot. And Shane keeps talking as if, he's got to make it to Bathurst and survive that weekend, because if something goes wrong, he could lose 300 points. But given the form he's in, he could make it to Bathurst, have a bad Bathurst, for example, and still win the championship. He's just got that form everywhere he goes. It doesn't matter. So, unfortunate there for De Pasquale, but he still finished second ahead of Waters. But, he could have almost lost second to Waters if he had slowed down a bit too much, because that 5-second penalty would have put him behind. But unfortunately, or fortunately, I keep getting those two words confused today. I don't know why. Anyway, fortunately, he didn't lose that extra position, so good on him for that. But the story is still the same. Who's going to stop Van Gisbergen, or how are you going to stop Van Gisbergen? The answer is nobody knows. Even trying to do it that way is not going to work. Elsewhere, I brought up the pain for Scott Pye again, becoming a bit of a theme in 2022. There's been too many incidents that have involved him, whether it's his fault or not. I just think it's rather sad, because I am a bit of a fan of Scott Pye, and feel it's rather unfortunate that throughout his whole career that he's just been involved in so many incidents, and often they're quite spectacular and ridiculous. When you think back to like early parts of his career, and he has had those massive shunts, but he's had the most DNFs of any driver this season. This time he took too much curb at turn 3 in race 20, ran Davison wide and almost into the wall, only for him to get T-boned, and the damage again, adding to the bill. The damage bill or whatever that his team owner Charlie Schwerkoltz had to face this season, and it's been a rather tough season for them. They're a team that a year ago or whatever, I was saying, they're on the verge of breaking into regular podiums and being in a position where Grove Racing is right now, but they have regressed a little bit. The 2015 Supercars champion Mark Winterbottom finishing in 25th in the Saturday race, but did bounce back for a top 10 finish in race 20 on Sunday. But yeah, for Pye, he had the incident with James Courtney in Darwin, where he was innocent, but that took him out for the rest of the weekend. And then, of course, what happened in Perth as well, on the start-finish straight, took him out for the rest of the weekend as well. So he's missing a lot of points and a lot of results that are quite crucial for the team in the team's championship. So very difficult, for them as a team, and for Pye as well as a driver. I'm sure will be struggling to come to terms with with what's going on. So hopefully he can bounce back, and for the next race as well at the Bend home race, I think for Pye, South Australian. Yeah, I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong, but hopefully a good result for them next time out, and they can keep the car out of the walls and undamaged as well. That pretty much wraps it up. Good to see James Golding back as well, having replaced Gary Jacobson there at the Premier Racing in the Subway Commodore. Had a bit of an incident with James Courtney on the start line. That wasn't that great, but it'd be good to see him in the coming races, how he goes in his second opportunity in Supercars full time. So that pretty much wraps it up then. Thank you again for tuning it in. Probably not my finest work, if we're being honest. The whole congestion nasally thing does make me a bit hazy and whatnot, so hopefully it'll be fine for next time, having a break next week, and then of course we'll be back for the next F1 doubleheader with France and Hungary ahead of the mid-season break. Until then, everybody take care, keep an eye out on socials, go through the Linktree as always, and I'll see you guys next time.